Welcome to our Big Brother, Big Sister training video series. In this episode, we'll be talking about trauma-informed care and how you can support your little in different situations you may encounter during your time as a mentor. Trauma-informed care is about understanding and creating boundaries. Key points of trauma-informed care are respect, understanding, and knowing when to seek out help. It's important to know when the littles need to seek professional help, such as, do they need a psychotherapist, do they need a psychiatrist, or do they need a social worker? It's about respecting the lived experience of the person you are helping and understanding how their story impacts their day-to-day life. This topic will be explored further in our episode of Critical Mentoring. Before you get to this point, your little must be comfortable enough to talk to you openly. This is where creating relationships comes in. So let's look at how you can create that relationship. Creating a relationship starts with establishing what boundaries look like. You got to make sure they know it's a safe place, somewhere where they can talk and be their true, authentic self. The next step in creating a relationship is having empathy for the little. First, we have to understand what it means to be empathetic. It's not about feeling sorry for the person, but rather respecting and understanding the person's feelings in that moment. To do this, we need to have a sense of self-awareness. We need to have a form of emotional intelligence. Be aware of our emotions and how we respond to our little when they're sharing their lived experience or their form of trauma. When your little is expressing their lived experience, it's not for you to give a solution. It is for you to listen. Actively help them organize their thoughts and help them find ways to express how they are feeling. Let the person continue to speak about their experience and allow them a safe space where they can totally be authentic in that moment. Another important step is knowing how to create engagement. Engagement comes in different forms. It's through eye contact. It's through our body language or gestures, which indicates we are clearly listening. It's about establishing trust, which can vary from little to little. It's about how you spend time. Some of these littles may not have this experience with adults they can trust. How do you articulate yourself to them? Have you created those boundaries for them to understand that you are a person that they can trust? Active listening is a technique that should be used to build trust. With active listening, it's about echoing what they are saying. For example, if they say, "I feel sad," you can say, "Okay, I understand. Explain why you're sad." You're reiterating their feelings. By doing this, they'll be able to dig deeper and express what those feelings look like to them. We've spoken about boundaries and listening. We also spoke about empathy and its importance when creating a relationship. Empathy is also needed when we create boundaries. Why? Because if we do not have boundaries, the relationship may be negative. This is what we do not want for our littles. How can we create boundaries and what do they look like? Ask yourself, what am I comfortable talking about? What am I not comfortable talking about? For example, if you know you're not comfortable talking about suicide and your little talks about suicide, it is not for you to shut them down, but it's for you to say, well, I don't know much about suicide, but I can help you and you can trust me. I think we should talk to our case manager regarding this conversation so that we can find someone to help you talk about these feelings or thoughts about suicide. Another piece to understanding boundaries is self-reflection. After meeting with your mentee, reflect. How did the meeting go today? What went well? What didn't go well? Were boundaries established? Do they understand that? And if you're having trouble with understanding how to self-reflect or how to establish self-reflection, you can reach out or start with journaling. When dealing with littles, you have to understand boundaries. Sometimes they're going through some emotional hardships, and that can translate to a change in behavior or attitude. And if that's the case, and it translates into them being angry, don't take them being angry personally, because it has nothing to do with you. Sometimes humans respond in their subconscious mind, and their human response can be negative. Now let's look at trauma. We're going to define different types of trauma. The first kind of trauma is short-term trauma. With short-term trauma, something happens, some event, and then the situation arises, and then everything goes back to being okay. For example, somebody falls. The trauma is, oh, I fell, I got hurt. After you got hurt, you got a wound, but the wound heals. Everything is fine. Again, it's a distant memory. And yes, it's trauma, but it resolved itself. There's also long-term trauma. Long-term trauma happens over a period of time, and depending on the lived experience of the trauma can resurface itself. For example, if you've been in a car accident and that car accident happened on a rainy day or during a snowstorm, every time you go into a car and it's a rainy day or a snowstorm, there are certain triggers, and it can resurface trauma and impact the person's mental capacity for a day or that moment. Then you have generational trauma. This happens over 2 or more generations. For example, those who have experienced substance misuse across generations. Next, you have developmental trauma, and this is basically a form of trauma that is life-changing. It's usually considered a major adversity. For example, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. Developmental trauma carries through the person's entire life, and they usually have to get treatment or seek counseling. Then we have historical trauma. Historical trauma is anything related to slavery or war. Think here about the indigenous community. For example, the indigenous community had their children taken away and sent to residential schools, the last of which closed in 1996. A lot of historical trauma still resonates in present. So, how do we communicate with our littles when they're going through these different kinds of trauma? Most kids choose not to communicate. A lot of them suffer in silence because they are not sure how to express their feelings. They are not sure if it's safe for them to articulate. They're uncertain if there are boundaries that are safe enough for them to speak their truth. It's important for us to help these littles unpack what they are feeling. How can you help them again? It goes back to active listening, being present, and engaged. Being present is being there, mind, body, and spirit. Show the little that you are engaged in that moment. Make sure there's nothing to be a distraction. Some kids will come across without emotion, or maybe they seem negative, and it's going to take some time for them to find ways to express themselves. So, sometimes a little may not even want to talk about their lived experience, but they may want to draw about their lived experience. This is where the big brother, big sister resource bank and activities come in. Finding different mechanisms that can help bring out that communication is essential. By knowing your little, you'll know what's the best way to communicate. It could be through art, dialogue, baking, any medium that makes them feel safe. If there is a form of disassociation with the little, meaning that they tend to be disconnected between themselves and what is happening, it's up to you to find ways to get them engaged in mentorship experience. This is hard. This is where mood comes into the picture. Trauma-informed care is helping littles to find ways to manage how they're feeling. Your goal is to give the littles opportunities to share their experiences. Let's take a look back and recap on some of the definitions, such as empathy, engagement, and listening and what they mean in trauma-informed care. Empathy is about how to be caring and what caring looks like. So caring again is being present, being involved, establishing boundaries no matter what. Nothing will be perfect. Acknowledge mistakes through self-reflection. Ask yourself, what could you do better? How can you enhance this mentorship experience? I cannot emphasize enough the importance of do not take things personally. When you're finding different strategies on how to be cautious of the lived experience of the little, you may get reactions and outlashes, but do not take it personally because they're reliving an experience or they're feeling something in that moment they experienced during their trauma. They're not sure how to present or articulate that. The other thing is, make sure you provide them time to speak. A lot of times with children, they will process and then speak when they're ready. So don't forcefully engage them to speak. They'll speak on their terms when they're ready. But make sure you give them that body language and engagement so they see you're ready to listen. And when they're ready to talk, just listen. For example, if a parent is abusive, listen to the experience, but do not say your mom is abusive. Even if it's true, this may cause more friction in the home or escalate the abuse. Help find solutions. You can use the Big Brother, Big Sister resource database. Remember, there are supports available. Start with using the resource bank. There are also free counseling services, free support services. For example, social worker, a counselor, a psychotherapist. Find out what other supports are out there that are free. You also have your case manager that you can lend an ear with regards to if they're trying to find ways to mitigate supports. So, think about finding active, positive, engaging solutions. If you know that you're not within the means of giving support to the little, let your Big Brother, Big Sister team know what's happening. Engagement. Look at how you, the mentor, can be more engaged. Engagement is a very important aspect of trauma-informed care. As a mentor, your goal is to understand the little's mood. Sometimes they may have difficulty with regards to describing how they're feeling. So, you may ask them, how are you feeling today? You might not get a response. Instead of talking about how upset they are, they may hide under a table. They're not sure how to express themselves. So you have to be aware of that. You must develop the relationship and understand who the little is and how they respond. Engagement encompasses two types. First, how is the little engaging in the environment? What is their mood? How are they behaving or acting? Second, disassociation, hiding under a table. Outburst, may it be emotional, verbal, or physical. What they're trying to do is disassociate from the trauma. They're trying to depersonalize what they're feeling in that moment or depersonalize what is happening within their home or whenever the abuse is happening. As a mentor, we need to be engaged and acknowledge these behaviors as responses to trauma. It is up to us to find ways to support the littles back to normal mood or behavior. Finally, trauma-informed care is not about a single solution. There is no perfect way to get a positive response. Trauma-informed care is about collaborating with your caseworker, the families, as well as your little. Trauma-informed care is about self-reflection, asking what you can do to improve the work you do. Trauma-informed care is about being empathetic, listening actively. Above all, trauma-informed care is about communication.